Cowboy bought an aggressive puppy for 25 cents. 3 months later, he was left in shock. The purchase seemed insignificant at first, just a quarter for a troubled pup nobody wanted. Nobody could have predicted how dramatically this small transaction would change both their lives. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Sometimes, the things people throw away become the most precious treasures in our lives. In the summer of 1887, the unforgiving sun beat down on Silver Creek's dusty livestock auction. John Smith stood apart from the crowd, his weathered face shaded by a worn hat that had seen better days. At 45, the former Union cavalry scout carried grief like an invisible burden, the absence of his wife Mary still raw after 2 winters without her. The townsfolk were busy examining horses and cattle, haggling over prices with Carl Miller, the auctioneer whose booming voice carried across the yard. John hadn't planned on attending. His meager savings were meant for necessities, but something had drawn him here today, some restlessness he couldn't name. That's when he heard it, a low, fierce growling from a crate set apart from the other animals. John approached slowly, the way he'd once approached skittish horses during the war. Inside, a small brown and black puppy bared its teeth, wild-eyed and terrified. "That one's not worth your time," Sheriff Robert Johnson called out, shaking his silver-streaked head. "Found running wild after its mother was killed. Bites everyone who comes near." The other auction-goers gave the crate a wide berth. Doc Davis, who'd stopped by after tending to a patient, looked at the animal with pity. "Poor creature's too far gone," the gentle physician remarked. "Some things can't be saved." But John saw something different in those frightened eyes, something familiar. He knelt beside the crate, ignoring the warning growls. The puppy lunged at his fingers when he brought them near the slats, but John didn't flinch. "How much?" he asked quietly. Carl Miller laughed. "2 bits. If you're fool enough to take him." John reached into his pocket and pulled out his last quarter, worn smooth from years of carrying it as a reminder of his wedding day. He dropped the coin into the auctioneer's palm, ignoring the murmurs and chuckles spreading through the crowd. Jake Brown, who'd stepped out from his silver-dollar saloon to watch the auction, whistled low. "Smith's either brave or crazy," he muttered to a neighbor. John wrapped the snarling puppy in an old blanket, weathering the bites and scratches with stoic patience. As he carried his new charge toward his wagon, laughter and warnings followed him down the sun-baked road. "That dog'll tear your throat out first chance it gets," someone called. But John ignored them all, placing the bundle carefully in his vehicle. There was something about this unwanted creature that spoke to him, perhaps because he, too, knew what it meant to be hollowed out by loss and fear. As he drove toward his rented patch of land outside town, John felt the first stirring of something he'd thought long dead. Hope. A stubborn, fragile hope that only a man who's lost everything can truly understand. John Smith had been 45 years old for exactly 3 months, ever since the fever took his wife Mary 2 winters before. The cruel illness had swept through Silver Creek with little warning, claiming 3 souls before disappearing like morning mist. Mary had been the last to go, her hand growing cold in his as dawn broke over the prairie. The pain of her absence had hollowed him out, turning his days into a string of empty chores on a rented patch of land just outside town. Sometimes he caught himself speaking to her, only to be answered by the whistling wind through fence posts. The small journal Mary gave him for their 5th anniversary was always close, crammed with half-written thoughts he never dared speak aloud. Its leather cover had softened with handling, the pages yellowed at the edges where his calloused fingers turned them night after night. "Write what you can't say," she'd told him, knowing how words tangled in his throat. Now those scribbled lines were all he had left of their conversations. Silver Creek was a crossroads kind of place, where the general store faced the saloon and the church kept a polite distance from both. A single dusty street connected everything, widening in the center where wagons turned around before heading back the way they came. Most travelers passed through without stopping, their eyes already fixed on somewhere more promising. Those who stayed formed a tight-knit community where news traveled faster than the weekly mail coach. Folks there minded their own, but watched every new arrival, and John, quiet, still wearing his wedding ring, was no exception. The former cavalry scout had arrived 18 months ago with Mary beside him, both hoping the dry air would ease her persistent cough. For a while, it had seemed to work. They'd made tentative friends, planted a small garden, and even discussed building their own place someday. The land he rented from Mrs. Davis, a sharp-eyed widow whose husband had been lost to a mining accident years before, offered a peaceful refuge with its modest cabin and sturdy barn. The property sat just far enough from town to avoid casual visitors, but close enough to reach the general store before noon if he set out at dawn. From his porch, John could see the distant church steeple, and on clear days, the rolling hills that marked the county line. But the silence gnawed at him. Without Mary's gentle humming or soft footsteps, the cabin echoed with emptiness. John worked himself to exhaustion each day, mending fences, chopping wood, tending livestock, hoping physical fatigue would bring dreamless sleep. Instead, he often found himself sitting on the porch until dawn, Mary's journal open on his lap, watching the stars wheel overhead, and wondering how a man learns to live with half his heart buried in the churchyard. Sheriff Robert Johnson made his presence known with a deliberate nod as he approached John's fence line. The lean lawman with silver threading through his dark hair sat comfortably in his saddle, watching as John worked the wire with practiced hands. "Heard you were Union cavalry," the sheriff remarked casually, though his eyes held the careful assessment of a man responsible for everyone's safety. "Scout division, if the rumors are true." John paused, his weathered fingers stilling on the fence. He'd hoped to leave that part of himself behind when he settled in Silver Creek. "Different life long ago," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of memories he preferred not to disturb. The sheriff nodded, respecting the boundary. "Well, town's glad to have you all the same. Mrs. Davis speaks highly of your reliability as a tenant." With that, he tipped his hat and rode on, leaving John to his thoughts and his work. Silver Creek was small enough that avoiding people entirely proved impossible. The general store faced the Silver Dollar Saloon across the dusty main street, with the white-steepled church maintaining a dignified distance from both establishments. John found himself drawn to the saloon on evenings when the silence of his cabin grew too oppressive. Jake Brown, the proprietor, ran a clean establishment that served honest whiskey at fair prices. The saloon owner had an uncanny ability to read his patrons, knowing when conversation was welcome and when silence was preferred. He'd slide a glass across the polished bar to John with nothing more than a nod, sensing the grief that still clung to the newcomer like a shadow. "Weather's turning," Jake might offer, or "cattle prices are holding steady," safe topics that required no painful revelations from his quiet customer. It was Doc Davis who truly breached John's solitude. The physician, nearing 60 with hands still steady despite decades of setting bones and delivering babies, first encountered John when a stubborn nail had torn through his palm during barn repairs. "Military man," Doc had commented, not a question, but a recognition as he cleaned the wound. "The way you hold yourself, the way you endure pain." John had looked up sharply, but found no judgment in the older man's eyes, only understanding. The doctor's office held a faded photograph of young men in Confederate gray, and John recognized the shared language of loss. "War leaves its mark," Doc had said quietly, "on all of us." From that day forward, the two men found in each other a companionship built on mutual respect. Both had been marked by conflicts and personal tragedies that had left them quieter, but never bitter. Sometimes they'd share a drink on Doc's porch, their silence more comfortable than any words could be. John had come to the auction looking for a cow or perhaps a few chickens to fill the empty barn on his rented land. He'd been living frugally since Mary's passing, and livestock seemed a practical way to bring some life back to the place. But as he walked between the pens of bleating goats and clucking hens, a low, furious growling drew his attention to the back of the auction yard. There, in a wooden crate set apart from the other animals, crouched a puppy, 4 months old by the look of him, brown and black, with eyes wild with fear and teeth bared to the world. The animal's fur was matted with dirt, and each time someone passed, he lunged at the slats with desperate ferocity. The auctioneer, Carl Miller, a heavy-set man with a voice worn rough from years of calling bids, shook his head when he caught John looking. "Found him running wild out by Cottonwood Creek," he explained. "Mother's gone, likely shot or taken by coyotes. Snaps at everything that moves. I was about to let him go back to the wild. No one wants a dog they can't handle." John knelt by the crate, moving slow and gentle the way he'd learned during his cavalry days. "Easy, friend," he murmured in the voice he'd used on spooked horses during thunderstorms. The puppy retreated to the back corner, a continuous growl rumbling from his small chest. Reaching into his pocket, John pulled out Mary's journal, the one she'd given him for their 5th anniversary, now filled with his half-written thoughts. He tore a blank page from the back and carefully slid it through the slats. The puppy, exhausted from days of fighting against the world, quieted just a hair to sniff the unfamiliar scent. "Something of mine," John whispered. "Something that matters." For just a moment, the animal's eyes met his, not with trust, but with a flicker of recognition, one survivor acknowledging another. "How much?" John asked, without looking up. Carl scratched his chin. "2 bits, if you're full enough," he replied with a laugh that several nearby farmers echoed. John reached into his pocket and pulled out his lucky quarter, worn smooth since his wedding day, a token he'd carried through the war and every day since. He placed it in the auctioneer's calloused palm. "You're buying yourself trouble, Smith," Carl warned, but pocketed the coin all the same. As John carefully lifted the crate, feeling the weight of the frightened animal inside. He knew that the fate of both man and dog had just been sealed with that 25-cent gamble. Neither of them could possibly know how that simple transaction would change everything. The journey home was nothing short of a battle. The puppy fought John Smith with every ounce of his small being, teeth snapping at the worn blanket the cowboy had carefully wrapped around him. Each time John attempted to secure the bundle, the pup would wriggle free, barking himself hoarse with a determination that bordered on desperation. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that," John muttered, finally managing to place the squirming bundle on the seat beside him in the wagon. As they traveled down the dusty road toward the ranch, something unexpected happened. The rhythmic creak of the wagon wheels, the familiar sense of leather and horse, and the gentle swaying motion gradually calmed the wild creature. The puppy's frantic struggles slowed, then ceased altogether as exhaustion finally claimed him. John found himself talking aloud as they rode, his voice filling the silence that had been his constant companion since Mary's passing. He spoke of simple things, the weather, his plans for the small patch of land he rented from Mrs. Davis, the repairs needed for the barn roof. Then, almost without realizing it, he began sharing deeper thoughts, secrets he'd previously only committed to Mary's journal or whispered to his wife's memory. "Never thought I'd be talking to a dog," he said with a hint of self-deprecation. "But you're a good listener, even if you did try to take my finger off." By the time they reached the ranch, the sun hung low on the horizon, painting the modest homestead in hues of amber and gold. John carried the now quiet bundle to the barn, where he quickly fashioned a small pen using spare lumber. He lined it with fresh straw, placed a shallow dish of water within reach, and stepped back to survey his work. "This is home now," he said softly, his weathered face gentle in the fading light. "Not much, but it's safe." The puppy, released from the blanket, immediately retreated to the farthest corner of the pen, eyes never leaving the man who had brought him here. When John returned with a bowl of leftover stew, hunger eventually overcame caution. The small animal devoured the offering, licking the bowl clean while keeping a wary watch on his new owner. That evening, seated at his simple table by lamplight, John opened Mary's journal and began to write. The scratch of his pencil mingled with the night sounds of the prairie, the distant call of coyotes, the rustle of wind through dry grass, and now the soft shuffling from the barn. He paused, listening to those small movements, and realized that for the first time in 2 winters, the silence of his home felt a little less empty, a little less absolute. John closed the journal and looked toward the barn. "Good night, little fighter," he whispered. "Tomorrow's another day." That night, John Smith sat at his weathered table, the oil lamp casting long shadows across the small cabin. He opened Mary's journal, the leather worn smooth from years of handling, and dipped his pen in ink. "Brought home a pup today," he wrote, his handwriting neat despite his calloused hands. "Mary would have laughed at me, paying good money for something that bites everyone who tries to help it." A smile touched his lips at the thought of his late wife's reaction. She'd always had a soft spot for the broken things of the world. He closed the journal and stepped onto the porch, the cool night air of Silver Creek settling around him. The stars stretched endlessly above, bright pinpricks against the vast darkness. From the barn came the occasional rustle and soft whine of the puppy settling in for the night. John leaned against the porch rail, feeling the ache of Mary's absence, a constant companion these past 2 winters, softened just a little. The presence of another living creature, even one as wild and untrusting as the pup, had somehow made the ranch feel less empty. Over the next days, John developed a careful routine with Chance. Each morning, he'd approach the makeshift pen slowly, speaking in low, even tones about nothing in particular. The weather, chores for the day, memories of his cavalry days. He'd set down a bowl of food, then retreat to give the animal space. "You've got to earn trust," he told Doc Davis, when the physician stopped by to check on a cut on John's hand, courtesy of the pup's sharp teeth. "Can't rush it any more than you can rush healing." The doctor nodded, understanding in his gentle eyes. "Some wounds take longer than others, John, for both man and beast." By the end of the week, the transformation was subtle but undeniable. The puppy still watched John's every movement with intense focus, but the snarling had subsided. When John offered food, the animal no longer lunged, but approached cautiously, maintaining eye contact as if assessing the man's intentions. One evening, as John sat mending a bridle, the pup ventured closer than ever before, sniffing at his boots before retreating to a safe distance. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it was progress, a slow thawing of distrust that mirrored John's own gradual return to the world of the living. "We're both learning," he whispered to the barn's shadowy corners as he left that night, both figuring out how to start over. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, John Smith slept without dreams of what he'd lost. On the 3rd morning, John Smith carried his steaming coffee to the barn, the familiar creak of the door announcing his arrival. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the wooden slats, creating golden patterns across the straw-covered floor. To his surprise, the puppy wasn't huddled in the corner as usual, but was stretched out in a patch of sunlight, eyes half closed in contentment. "Morning, little one," John said softly. For the first time since bringing the dog home, the pup's ears twitched forward at the sound of his voice, a small gesture that made the cowboy's heart leap. No growling, no retreat, just a curious tilt of the head as those intelligent eyes studied him. John settled on an upturned crate, sipping his coffee while making notes in Mary's journal about these small improvements. As he turned a page, something fluttered to the ground, a faded blue ribbon, frayed at the edges but still vibrant against the dusty floor. The sight of it caught him unprepared, like a physical blow to his chest. "Her apple pie," he whispered, memories washing over him. The county fair 6 summers ago, Mary standing proudly as the judges declared her the winner. Her cheeks had flushed pink with pleasure as she pinned the ribbon to her dress, refusing to remove it even on the bumpy wagon ride home. John remembered the taste of that pie, cinnamon and apples and something uniquely Mary that no one else could replicate. She had always been the one to mark perfect moments, tucking small mementos between the pages of his journal. A pressed wildflower from their picnic by Silver Creek, a ticket stub from the traveling show, this blue ribbon from her triumph at the fair. "So you'll find them again," she'd explained, "when the days grow hard and you need reminding of good things." The puppy, sensing the shift in John's mood, cautiously rose from his sunny spot. With deliberate movements, the animal crept closer, each step hesitant yet purposeful. His eyes never left the man's face, reading emotions there that John thought he'd hidden from the world. When the dog was just inches away, he paused, muscles tense as if ready to retreat. Then, with what seemed like tremendous courage for a creature so small and previously so wild, he stretched his neck forward and sniffed at the ribbon in John's trembling hand. "This belonged to someone special," John explained, his voice rough with emotion. The pup inched closer still, eyes fixed on the man who might finally offer what he needed most: a home, safety, belonging. For the first time since Mary's passing, John felt something inside him shift and settle. Two broken spirits finding in each other what the world had taken away. John's chest tightened as memories washed over him like a sudden summer storm. Mary had wanted children so desperately. 3 miscarriages in 7 years had carved hollows in her spirit, though she never let bitterness take root. Instead, Mary Smith had channeled that maternal energy into caring for every abandoned creature that crossed their path, nursing injured birds, bottle-feeding orphaned lambs, and finding homes for stray cats. "She would have loved you," John whispered into the barn's shadowy interior, his voice catching, "even with all your growling and biting." The confession felt strange on his lips after 2 years of near silence. She always said the wildest creatures just needed someone patient enough to wait out their fear. The puppy's ears twitched at the sound of John's voice. For a moment, the animal seemed to study him with those intelligent eyes, as if truly listening to his words. "I couldn't save her," John continued, the pain rising like floodwater. "The fever came so fast. Doc Davis tried everything. But," he trailed off, remembering the doctor's gentle hand on his shoulder, the quiet devastation in the older man's eyes as he delivered the news that had shattered John's world. Something shifted in the atmosphere between them. The puppy, who had maintained a wary distance for days, crept forward on his belly. With a hesitancy that spoke of past hurts, he stretched his neck and pressed his small head against John's palm. The simple gesture, this tentative offer of comfort from a creature who had every reason to distrust humans, broke something loose inside John. 2 years of carefully contained grief spilled over. Tears tracked silently down his weathered face, dropping onto the straw-covered floor. "Well now," he managed, his voice rough, "looks like we understand each other after all." In that quiet, broken moment, John decided on a name. "I'm gonna call you Chance," he said softly. "Mary always believed in second chances, said it was the most important gift we could give, to others or ourselves." The name seemed to settle around the puppy like a perfectly fitted collar. Chance pressed closer, the perpetual snarl finally fading from his expression. John gently ran his hand over the dog's brown and black coat, feeling the sharp angles of young bones that needed more flesh. "We'll start fresh, you and me," John promised. "Got plenty of healing to do, both of us." Chance's tail gave a tentative wag, the first John had seen, and something warm unfurled in his chest. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it felt remarkably like the first fragile shoots of hope pushing through hard-packed soil after a long, bitter winter. The transformation in Chance was nothing short of miraculous. Where once stood a snarling, untrusting creature, now sat a dog whose eyes followed John Smith with unwavering devotion. The wild animal that had snapped at every extended hand now leaned into John's touch, as if starved for the very affection he'd once rejected. Most remarkable was how the dog seemed to sense John's emotional state, pressing closer on days when memories weighed heaviest. One crisp morning, as sunlight streamed through the barn windows, John pulled Mary's blue ribbon from his journal. The faded fabric had been her prized possession after winning the county fair's apple pie contest years ago. He held it carefully between weathered fingers, then extended it toward the dog. "This belonged to someone special," he whispered, his voice catching. "She had a gift for seeing the heart of things, saw goodness where others couldn't." John's eyes grew distant. "She would have loved you from the first moment." Chance sniffed the ribbon cautiously, then looked up at his owner with an expression that seemed almost human in its understanding. The animal settled against John's side, head resting on the man's knee as if offering comfort. Two broken souls, finding in each other what they'd lost elsewhere. From that morning forward, the pair became inseparable. The bond between them deepened with each passing day. Chance's intelligence astonished even Doc Davis, who remarked during a visit that he'd never seen such a quick study. The dog learned commands after just 1 or 2 demonstrations, watching John with intense concentration, then executing each task with unmistakable pride. Evenings found them on the porch of the small ranch house, John working a piece of maple wood with his pocket knife, while his companion lay contentedly at his feet. The carving slowly took shape as a whistle, something practical from his cavalry days, when signals could mean the difference between life and death. "My old unit commander would have given his right arm for a dog like you," John told Chance one evening, pausing to test the whistle's tone. The dog's ears perked forward at the sound, head tilting with curiosity. Sheriff Johnson, passing by on patrol, reined his horse toward the fence. "That animal of yours is turning into quite the partner," he called. "Hard to believe he's the same wild thing from the auction." John nodded, a rare smile crossing his face. "Sometimes," he replied, "the things nobody wants turn out to be exactly what you need." As darkness settled over Silver Creek, man and dog remained on the porch, 2 silhouettes against the lamplight, neither one alone anymore. The memories of John Smith's cavalry days came flooding back as his weathered hands worked the maple wood. Every careful cut and smooth stroke of his knife revealed the whistle taking shape beneath his fingers. During the war, a clear whistle signal had saved his unit more than once, alerting scouts to danger or calling men back from perilous positions. Now, sitting on his porch as the evening painted the sky in amber hues, he crafted something that would connect his past skills to his new purpose. "This might come in handy, boy," he murmured to Chance, who lay attentively at his feet, dark eyes following every movement of John's hands. The dog's intelligence continued to surprise him. With each passing day, the once wild puppy showed remarkable aptitude for learning. John tested a note on the half-finished whistle, and Chance's ears immediately perked forward, head tilting with curiosity. The cowboy smiled, his first genuine smile in months, as he realized how quickly the animal associated the sound with attention and instruction. "We'll make something of you yet," he said softly, running his palm over the dog's brown and black coat. As dusk settled over the ranch, Chance suddenly stiffened. His ears shot forward, body tensing as he rose to his feet. John paused his carving, listening. Years of military scouting had taught him to trust an animal's instincts. Moments later, he heard it too, the distinctive rhythm of hoofbeats approaching his property. John tucked the whistle into his pocket and stood, one hand resting reassuringly on Chance's head. "Easy now," he whispered, as a lone rider emerged from the growing shadows. The stranger was lean and hard-faced, with eyes that darted nervously around the property, taking inventory. Something about his manner raised John's hackles. The way he sat his horse, perhaps, or how his right hand never strayed far from his holster. "Evening," the man called. "Looking for work and a place to bed down for the night." John studied him carefully, noting the dust of long travel and the way the stranger's gaze lingered too long on the barn and house. Chance pressed against his leg, a low, warning growl rumbling in his chest. "No work here," John replied evenly. "Town's just 4 miles down that road. Silver Dollar Saloon might have information on jobs." The stranger's eyes narrowed slightly. Mighty unfriendly. Chance's growl deepened, and John felt a surge of gratitude for the animal's protective instinct. The stranger seemed to reconsider, noting the dog's stance and the quiet resolve in John's expression. After an uncomfortable silence, the rider tipped his hat with forced casualness. "I'll try my luck in town, then." Only when the hoofbeats faded into the distance did John relax. "Good boy," he whispered, kneeling to ruffle Chance's fur. The dog pressed his muzzle into John's palm, and in that moment, the cowboy felt something he hadn't experienced since Mary's passing, the warm certainty of trust. A month after the livestock auction, Chance had transformed from a wild, snapping creature into a devoted companion. John Smith watched with quiet amazement as the dog demonstrated not only loyalty, but an uncanny intelligence that seemed almost human. One afternoon, while John was repairing fence posts, Chance disappeared into the barn, barking insistently until his owner followed. Inside the shadowy structure, the dog pawed at a loose floorboard near the back wall. John knelt down, curious about what had caught the animal's attention. Lifting the weathered plank, he found the hiding place he'd created years ago, a space that contained the remnants of his former life. The cavalry saber gleamed dully in the filtered light, alongside his field glasses, tarnished medals, and a faded photograph of his military unit. "Well now," John murmured, surprised. "How did you find this, boy?" Chance sat beside him, ears perked forward, watching as John carefully lifted each item from its resting place. The man's fingers trembled slightly as he held the photograph, faces of long-dead comrades staring back at him from across the years. "I was a scout," he explained to the attentive dog. "Union cavalry. Had a knack for finding paths others couldn't see, for reading terrain and tracking." John ran his thumb over the image. "Saved a lot of men, lost some too." Chance listened with that peculiar stillness that had become familiar to John. Head slightly tilted, eyes fixed on his face, as though comprehending every word. The dog's presence encouraged John to speak of things he'd kept bottled inside since Mary's passing. "The war changes a man," he continued, setting down the photograph and picking up one of the medals. "Teaches you to sleep with one eye open, to listen for trouble before it finds you." As dusk settled over Silver Creek, John returned the items to their hiding place, except for the field glasses, which he placed on the shelf above his desk. The war had shaped him into someone perpetually vigilant, a quality that had served him well but had also kept him isolated. That night, after writing in Mary's journal about the day's events, John extinguished the lamp and settled into bed. The familiar creaking of the house and whisper of prairie wind through the eaves had been his only nighttime companions for 2 long years. But tonight was different. With a soft whine, Chance padded across the wooden floor and settled beside the bed, his warm body a gentle presence in the darkness. After a moment's hesitation, the dog jumped up, turning 3 times before curling against John's side. John rested his hand on Chance's fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of the animal's breathing. The realization struck him with unexpected force. He was no longer alone. The thought brought a bittersweet pang, a mixture of gratitude and the lingering ache of all he had lost. Good boy, he whispered into the darkness. And for the first time in years, John Smith slept deeply, without dreams of war or loss. The morning mist still clung to the ground when Sheriff Robert Johnson's horse appeared on the horizon. John Smith recognized the lawman's distinctive silhouette long before he could make out his face. Chance, who had been chasing grasshoppers through the dewy grass, immediately stiffened, his ears pricked forward as he assessed the approaching rider. "Morning, John," the sheriff called, dismounting with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. His expression was grave, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. "That's some news you ought to hear." John offered coffee, which the lawman accepted gratefully. They settled on the porch steps, Chance positioning himself attentively at John's feet, his intelligent eyes moving between the two men. "The Crimson Gang has been moving through the territory," Sheriff Johnson said, his voice low and measured. "Led by Jack Davis, mean piece of work with a reputation for unnecessary cruelty." He took a slow sip of coffee. "They hit Millerville 2 days ago. Killed 2 deputies who tried to stop them from robbing the bank. Word is they're heading our way." John felt a familiar tension settle across his shoulders, the same alertness he'd known during his scouting days. Chance, sensing the shift in his master's mood, pressed closer against John's leg. "That rider who came by last week," John said, describing the lean, wary stranger who had asked for work. "Something about him didn't sit right." Chance felt it too. The sheriff's weathered face hardened. "Fits the pattern. They usually send someone ahead to scout the town, identify weaknesses." He set his empty cup down with deliberate care. "I'm warning everyone to be vigilant, especially folks like you, living outside town." "I appreciate the warning," John replied, unconsciously resting his hand on the dog's head. Sheriff Johnson stood, adjusting his gun belt. "Most folks in Silver Creek don't know what real trouble looks like, but you and I, we've seen men like Davis before." John nodded, memories of war-torn landscapes flashing unbidden through his mind. "I'll be increasing patrols," the lawman added, mounting his horse. "Keep that dog close. He's got good instincts." As the sheriff rode away, dust rising behind his horse's hooves, John looked down at Chance. The dog's steady gaze held unwavering loyalty, a silent promise of protection. For the first time since Mary's passing, John felt something beyond the hollow ache of grief, a sense of purpose, of readiness. Danger was coming to Silver Creek, but unlike the lonely days after losing his wife, John wouldn't face it alone. He had Chance now, a partner worth fighting for. The passing weeks transformed both John Smith and Chance. Each morning, they rose with the sun, sharing breakfast before tackling the day's work. The once wild pup now trotted confidently alongside his master, learning the rhythms of ranch life. Fence mending, which had once been a lonely chore, became a partnership. John hammering posts while Chance carried tools in his mouth, tail wagging with pride at his contribution. "Mary would have loved you," John often said during these moments, his voice carrying across the open fields. He found himself talking more than he had in years, sharing thoughts about the weather, plans for winter preparations, and even dreams of expanding the small vegetable garden. The dog listened with his head tilted, eyes fixed on John's face with an understanding that went beyond words. Doc Davis noticed the change during his monthly visit to check on John's old war injury. "That animal's done more for you than any medicine I could prescribe," the physician remarked, watching Chance retrieve John's cavalry whistle with gentle precision. The older man smiled, remembering how many patients he'd lost to grief rather than illness over his long career. The training sessions with the carved maple whistle grew increasingly sophisticated. John drew on his military experience, teaching Chance commands that would have impressed his former cavalry unit. The dog mastered signals for retrieve, scout ahead, and return immediately. responding with an intelligence that left Jake Brown speechless when he witnessed a demonstration outside the Silver Dollar Saloon. "Never seen anything like it," the saloon owner admitted, offering John his first free drink. That 25-cent investment's paying dividends. Word spread through Silver Creek. Townspeople who had once averted their eyes from the grieving widower now stopped to chat, asking about Chance and commenting on John's improved spirits. Mrs. Davis even invited him to Sunday dinner, something unthinkable months before, when he'd been a silent, solitary tenant. One evening, as autumn painted the horizon with fiery colors, John sat on his porch, writing in Mary's journal. Chance lay at his feet, occasionally nudging his hand for attention. "You know what, boy?" John said, scratching behind the dog's ears. "I think I'm ready to live again." The dog's eyes, warm and knowing, held his gaze. The ache of loneliness that had been John's constant companion since Mary's passing hadn't disappeared completely. It had simply transformed into something bearable, something that left room for new connections and purpose. In the distance, Sheriff Johnson rode toward the ranch, his silhouette growing larger against the setting sun. Chance's ears perked up, sensing the visitor before John could make out the lawman's features. Neither man nor dog knew it yet, but their peaceful routine was about to change forever. The fragile peace of Silver Creek began to crumble as reports of the Crimson Gang's brutality echoed through the territory. Ock Davis arrived at John Smith's ranch one evening, his weathered face grave as he dismounted from his horse. "They hit Oak Ridge yesterday," the doctor said, removing his hat as he stepped onto the porch. "2 men dead, bank emptied. Sheriff over there barely got a shot off." John nodded silently, feeling the weight of his past settling back onto his shoulders. Chance pressed against his leg, sensing the tension in his master's body. "I know that look," Doc said, studying his friend's face. "You're thinking about your cavalry days." "Skills I hope were buried for good," John replied, his hand finding Chance's head automatically. The dog's fur had grown thick and glossy in the months since the auction, no longer the matted coat of a wild creature. "Sometimes peaceful folks have to make hard choices." The doctor nodded, understanding the burden of a man with abilities that set him apart. "Town's talking. They know about your background now." That night, after Doc left, John pulled out his old field glasses and scanned the horizon from his porch. The darkness revealed nothing, but instinct told him danger was approaching. Chance sat alert beside him, ears forward, sharing the vigil. The following morning, John stood before Mary's mirror, the glass spotted with age, but still true. The reflection surprised him. Gone was the hollow-eyed widower who had arrived in Silver Creek. Instead, he saw a man transformed, shoulders straight, eyes clear and purposeful. The grief hadn't vanished, but something new had taken root alongside it, a determination to protect what mattered. Chance padded into the room, no longer the snarling puppy from the auction crate, but a powerful adult dog with intelligent eyes and unwavering loyalty. He sat beside John, their reflection a portrait of partnership. "They'll be looking to me," John said quietly, meeting his own gaze in the mirror. "The town. They'll expect me to know what to do." The responsibility settled heavily on him. It had been years since he'd led men, made decisions that determined who lived and who died. Yet as he looked at Chance, John felt a certainty he hadn't known since Mary's death. Sheriff Johnson rode up later that day, dust coating his horse and urgency in his movements. "They've been spotted 20 miles east," he announced without preamble. "I need your help, John. The town needs it." John nodded, decision already made. "I'll be there." As the sheriff rode away, John turned to Chance. "Looks like our quiet days are numbered, boy." The dog tilted his head, eyes fixed on John with absolute trust. In that moment, John knew he would fight, not just for the town, but for the second chance at life that a 25-cent puppy had given him. The oil lamps cast long shadows across John's living room as Sheriff Robert Johnson paced the worn floorboards. 5 other men from Silver Creek sat in tense silence. Doc Davis, with his weathered hands clasped together, Jake Brown leaning against the doorframe, and 3 shopkeepers whose usual jovial demeanor had vanished. Outside, the autumn wind whistled through the gaps in the barn where Chance kept watch. "They hit Oak Ridge yesterday," the sheriff said, his voice tight. 2 dead. Bank emptied. The Crimson Gang doesn't leave survivors. Doc nodded gravely. "My cousin there says they're methodical. Military precision, not your typical outlaws." John Smith stood by the fireplace, the dancing flames illuminating the cavalry photograph he'd finally displayed on the mantel. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. "We know you were Union cavalry," Jake said finally. "Scout, from what I hear. Good with tactics." John ran his hand along the worn leather of Mary's journal. "That was another life." Mrs. Davis's nephew cleared his throat. "My aunt says you saved your whole unit when you were surrounded at Shiloh." The former scout looked out the window toward Mary's favorite oak tree. For 2 years he'd buried his past alongside his grief, but now Silver Creek needed the man he used to be. "We have 3 choices," John said, turning back to face the townsmen. "Abandon our homes, hide and hope they pass through, or stand and fight." The shopkeepers exchanged nervous glances. "We're not soldiers," one muttered. "Neither were we when the war started," Doc replied. "But we learned." Sheriff Johnson placed his hat on the table. "I won't force anyone to stay, but I'm not abandoning this town." The room grew quiet again until John finally spoke the words that would change everything. "If the town decides to fight, I'll help organize our defense." The men nodded, some with relief, others with grim determination. Plans formed quickly: inventory of weapons, defensive positions, signals, and strategies. By the time they filed out into the night, Silver Creek had taken its first steps toward becoming a fortress. After they left, John sat alone in the lamplight. Chance padded in from his watch post and settled at his master's feet, resting his head on the worn boot. The dog's eyes, once wild with fear, now held steady confidence. "Looks like our quiet life might be over," John said softly, scratching behind the dog's ears. Chance looked up, his gaze unwavering in its trust. In that moment, John realized what Mary had always known, that sometimes love comes disguised as responsibility, and purpose arrives when we least expect it. This dog, purchased for 25 cents when no one else wanted him, had become more than just a companion. He'd become a partner worth fighting for. And perhaps, John thought, as he reached for his old field glasses, a town worth saving too. 3 months had passed since that fateful auction day. John Smith sat at his weathered oak table, a kerosene lamp casting long shadows across the room as he carefully unfolded an old photograph from his cavalry days. The edges were frayed, the faces faded by time, but the memories remained sharp as ever. His calloused fingers traced the line of young men standing tall in their Union uniforms, brothers in arms from another lifetime. Chance rested his head on John's knee, his intelligent eyes fixed on the photograph, as if he understood the weight of history it carried. The dog had grown considerably in these months, his once wild coat now glossy and well-kept, his eyes no longer filled with fear, but with unwavering loyalty. "These were good men," John whispered, scratching behind Chance's ear. "Some never made it home." The sudden pounding at his door startled both man and dog. Chance was on his feet instantly, alert but not aggressive. He'd learned to distinguish between threats and friends. When John opened the door, young Billy Davis stood there, the widow's grandson, his face flushed from running. "Mr. Smith," the boy gasped, "Ma sent me to warn you. There's strangers in town asking questions about former soldiers in the bank. They don't look right." John's expression hardened. "Describe them, Billy." "6 men, rough-looking. One has a scar across his cheek. They're staying at the saloon, but Mr. Brown says they ain't drinking much, just watching everyone." John nodded grimly. "The Crimson Gang. Go home to your grandmother and stay there." After Billy left, John retrieved his field glasses from the trunk where he kept his military relics. His cavalry instincts, dormant for years, now fully awakened. He loaded his rifle and placed it by the door. Chance suddenly stiffened, his ears perked toward the window. A low growl rumbled in his chest as he stared into the darkness beyond the glass. John extinguished the lamp and moved silently to the window, years of training guiding his movements. "Someone's out there," he whispered, placing a steadying hand on Chance's back. "You sense them too, don't you, boy?" In the pale moonlight, John caught the glint of metal moving between the trees. He whistled softly, the signal he'd taught Chance to remain still and silent. The dog obeyed instantly, though his muscles remained tense under John's hand. Sheriff Johnson arrived an hour later, moving cautiously through the shadows. His face was grim as John shared Billy's warning and what he'd observed. "They're scouting us," the lawman said quietly, "testing our defenses before the main force arrives." Both men knew what was coming. Silver Creek, with its peaceful streets and hard-working people, was about to become a battleground. John looked down at Chance, standing vigilant beside him, and felt a strange calm settle over him. This time, unlike in the war, he knew exactly what he was fighting for. Dawn broke sharp and cold over Silver Creek, painting the horizon with streaks of amber and gold. John Smith stood on the weathered porch of his ranch, field glasses pressed to his eyes, watching 6 riders approach from the northern ridge. They moved with practiced precision, not like common outlaws, but like men who'd seen battle. Disciplined, coordinated, dangerous. "They're coming," John murmured to Chance, who stood alert at his side, ears forward and muscles tense. The dog's transformation from that wild, biting puppy was complete, now a powerful, intelligent partner, ready for whatever came. Behind them, the townspeople of Silver Creek waited in hidden positions throughout the settlement. Shopkeepers crouched behind barricades, farmers steadied rifles from second-story windows, and even the elderly had roles to play in the defense John had organized over the past weeks. Sheriff Johnson had positioned himself near the bank, his silver hair tucked beneath his hat, his experienced eyes scanning for the first sign of trouble. John raised the carved wooden whistle to his lips and blew a pattern of short, sharp notes. Immediately, Chance bounded away, racing between buildings to deliver a folded message to Doc Davis, who waited with medical supplies prepared for the worst. The dog returned moments later, responsive to every command with flawless precision. "Good boy," John whispered, his hand briefly touching the dog's head before sending him off again with another whistle signal. The transformation of Silver Creek was remarkable. What had been a peaceful frontier town now resembled a military encampment. John's cavalry experience had proven invaluable as he drilled the townsfolk, teaching them to use the landscape and buildings to their advantage. Jake Brown had reinforced the saloon's windows. Mrs. Davis had opened her property as a fallback position, and young Billy had proven himself an excellent messenger, quick and quiet through the town's back alleys. John checked his timepiece, 11:45. The Crimson Gang would arrive within the hour. His tactical mind worked overtime, reviewing contingencies and backup plans. These weren't just neighbors anymore. They were a unified force prepared to defend their home. "Remember," he told them the night before, "we're not soldiers, but we have something worth fighting for." Chance returned from another mission, carrying a small package of ammunition from the general store. The dog's intelligence continued to amaze everyone, retrieving supplies, carrying messages, and even signaling positions with different barks that John had painstakingly taught him. As the riders drew closer, John felt a strange calm settle over him. The former scout touched the journal in his pocket, Mary's journal, and knew with certainty that the 25-cent gamble he'd taken on a wild, unwanted puppy had given him more than just companionship. It had given him purpose, community, and now the chance to protect what mattered. At 12 minutes past noon, the Crimson Gang rode into Silver Creek with arrogant confidence. 6 riders, dust-covered and armed, spread across the main street that now appeared deserted. Their leader, Jack Davis, sat tall in his saddle, his cold eyes scanning the empty storefronts with suspicion. The town seemed abandoned, yet something felt wrong to the experienced outlaw. "Something ain't right," Jack muttered, signaling his men. "Check the buildings, all of them." Hidden behind a barrel on the general store's porch, John Smith watched through his field glasses. His heart pounded steadily as he observed the outlaws dismounting, their hands hovering near their weapons. This was the moment they had prepared for. John placed the carved wooden whistle between his lips and gave 3 short blasts, the signal to begin. Sheriff Johnson emerged first from behind the church, his rifle raised and voice firm. "This is as far as you go, Davis." The gang leader spun around, reaching for his pistol, but froze when Doc Davis appeared at the bank entrance, weapon in hand. Jake Brown stepped out from the saloon doorway, flanked by 3 determined townsmen. Within seconds, the Crimson Gang found themselves surrounded by the people of Silver Creek, ordinary folk transformed into defenders. But it was chance who created the true chaos. The brown and black dog, no longer the frightened pup from the auction, leapt from the roof of the general store with military precision. He landed among the outlaws' horses. Barking fiercely and nipping at their legs, the animals reared and bucked, throwing 2 gang members to the ground while others struggled to control their mounts. "Get that damn dog!" Jack shouted, but Chance was everywhere at once, responding to John's whistle commands with uncanny intelligence. Gunfire erupted as one of the outlaws took aim at the sheriff. The sound echoed between buildings as townspeople fired from windows and doorways. John had positioned them perfectly. Crossfire would hit outlaws, not neighbors. "Fall back," Jack ordered his men, but the carefully orchestrated defense had them pinned. 2 gang members raised their hands in surrender when faced with Jake and his determined allies. John whistled again, and Chance darted between buildings, confusing the outlaws who couldn't track his movements. The dog's training had transformed him from wild pup to tactical partner, his every move calculated to maximum effect. The town's defenders moved with surprising discipline, following John's strategy to the letter. What the Crimson Gang had expected to be an easy target had become a coordinated trap, sprung by a former cavalry scout, a loyal dog, and a community united in its own defense. As the gunfire intensified, John caught Sheriff Johnson's eye across the street. They nodded to each other, knowing the battle for Silver Creek had only just begun. The battle erupted with the ferocity of a summer storm. Bullets splintered wood and shattered glass as the Crimson Gang realized they'd ridden into a carefully laid trap. John Smith's military training had transformed ordinary townsfolk into a coordinated defense force, each person knowing their role in protecting Silver Creek. Chance moved like a shadow through the chaos, responding to every whistle command with perfect precision. When one of Jack's men attempted to flank around the bank, the dog spotted the movement before anyone else. Doc Davis, focused on covering the main street, didn't see the outlaw slipping behind him with a drawn weapon. Chance launched himself forward without hesitation, a blur of brown and black fur that knocked the assailant off balance. The doctor turned at the commotion, raising his rifle just in time. "Good boy," Doc whispered as Chance darted away, already responding to another signal from his master. From his position on the roof of the general store, John coordinated the town's defense. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, reloading and firing while his mind calculated angles and positions. Sheriff Johnson held the north end of town, his silver hair visible as he directed the townspeople. Jake Brown and 3 farmers maintained the barricade near the saloon, preventing any escape. "They're breaking!" someone shouted as 2 gang members attempted to flee. The battle shifted when Crimson Jack spotted John. The outlaw leader, tall and calculating, circled around and entered the general store from the back. John heard the floorboards creak below just seconds before Jack's voice called out. "Come down, soldier boy. Just you and me now." John signaled Chance with 2 short whistles, their practiced emergency code. The dog immediately understood, slipping through a broken window into the store. While Jack's attention fixed on the stairwell, waiting for John to descend, Chance crept silently across the wooden floor. The timing had to be perfect. When Chance growled, Jack spun around, momentarily distracted. In that crucial second, John swung down from the roof through the front window, landing behind the outlaw leader. The thud of his boots made Jack turn back, finding himself caught between man and dog. "It's over," John said quietly, his rifle steady. "Tell your men to stand down." Jack Davis, for all his ruthlessness, recognized defeat when he saw it. With Chance's unwavering gaze fixed on him and John's rifle aimed at his chest, he dropped his weapon. "Stand down," he called out to his remaining men, his voice carrying through the bullet-riddled town. One by one, the outlaws surrendered. Silver Creek had prevailed, not through superior numbers or firepower, but through the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog, and the courage of ordinary people defending their home. The aftermath was bittersweet. As dawn broke over Silver Creek, the townspeople gathered on Main Street, surveying the damage with a mixture of relief and wonder. They had stood together against impossible odds, and won. John Smith watched from the steps of the general store, Chance sitting proudly at his side, both weary from the battle, but standing tall. "You've given this town something more valuable than safety," Sheriff Johnson said, clasping John's shoulder. "You've given us our courage back." The widow Davis approached with determined steps, a folded document in her weathered hands. "This land was never meant to be rented," she declared, pressing the deed into John's palm. "It's yours now. No arguments." Her sharp eyes softened as she bent to scratch behind Chance's ears. "Both of you have earned a proper home." Doc Davis, still bandaging minor wounds, looked up with a weary smile. "My services are yours for life, free of charge. Least I can do for the man who saved us all." Across the street, Jake nodded from the doorway of his saloon, adding, "First drink's always on the house, John. For both of you," he added with a wink toward Chance. The dog, once wild and unwanted, now stood as the town's guardian, accepting gentle pats from children who once feared him. John watched with quiet amazement how completely their lives had transformed in just 3 months. 6 months after the battle, on a crisp autumn morning, John fastened a new collar around Chance's neck. The brass tag caught the sunlight, the words Chance Smith engraved in careful letters. "You're family now," he whispered, "proper and official." Together, they walked the path to the small cemetery where Mary rested. John knelt beside the simple marker, Chance sitting respectfully at his side. "I wish you could have met him," he said softly. "You would have loved him from the start." He traced the letters of her name, feeling not the sharp pain of before, a gentle warmth. "He saved me, Mary. Just like you always said, sometimes what we need most comes in unexpected packages." That evening, as sunset painted Silver Creek in gold, John opened Mary's journal and wrote by lamplight. "Sometimes the most precious treasures come disguised as problems nobody else wants. Sometimes a quarter spent in faith returns dividends beyond measure." Chance rested his head on John's boot, eyes reflecting the flickering flame. For the first time since Mary's passing, John Smith felt completely at home, with a purpose worth defending and a partner worth cherishing for all the days to come.